Listening to my friend Doug Bandow talk about his view of a conservative American foreign policy reminds me of a debate I had with several of our libertarian friends, I think about 20 years ago, in which the proposition was resolved. The United States should have a constitutional amendment requiring that the United States military will be used only to defend the borders of the United States. I must tell you, I found that such a preposterous notion that I wasn't quite sure where to go with it, except to say, if history teaches us anything, it is that we best defend the borders of the United States by fighting wars on somebody else's territory rather than ours. We can go back and forth if question time will permit, Doug, on several of the finer points of how vitally we withdraw from the world. But let me just state some principles, since Suhail mentioned that's what we ought to be focused on here, that I hope will guide a conservative foreign policy, especially during our years in the wilderness, when we're trying to articulate one that will hopefully return us to power. I suggest to you that the place to start is with a winning conservative foreign policy. Not only winning in the sense that it actually protected this country, but it actually returned Republicans to power. Ronald Reagan called it peace through strength. And it is high time that we articulate that at a moment when Barack Obama seems determined to adopt a policy of peace, if we can get it, but certainly through weakness. This is a formula for, I'm afraid, disaster. We must use power wisely. Not everywhere that the temptation might present itself, to be sure, but where we use it, we must use it decisively. We must, and this is a point on which Doug and I are in violent agreement, as he mentioned, preserve our sovereignty. It will be under threat, as never before under the Obama administration, as it makes common cause with transnationalists of various stripes who believe that only by getting rid of our sovereignty can they properly rule the world in their own image. A principle that I was delighted to hear Mitt Romney speak to is that defending our country against particularly the threats that are now proliferating even into the hands of the Irans and the North Koreas, namely long-range ballistic missiles, must be a priority as before, except now, when the Obama administration seems determined to gut our missile defense, it will be more important for us to make it clear that's unacceptable. Finally, I believe we must counter totalitarian ideologies bent on our destruction. We have no option, except, of course, to be destroyed. I find that unpalatable, and I think we must resist it. The most urgent of these totalitarian ideologies is called by authoritative Islam Sharia. And we face it now not only abroad, as we see it marching through Europe, but even here, in ways that I will describe in a moment, and that Suhail Khan and I just debated a few months back at the Harbor League event. If you'd like to see a transcript of that most interesting conversation, I would commend our website, www.securefreedom.org. These principles will require conservatives to recognize anew the importance of national security. We have, I think, for too long, even in a period of war, regarded it as something that we might have to do reluctantly, but it's not quite, as Ronald Reagan saw it, a pillar of conservatism. And I think it must be that because it is not only essential to America's future that we articulate our principles and we seek to ensure that they are the guiding principles of our polity, I think it is absolutely critical to our political appeal to our countrymen, indeed our being deserving of their support. How do we do that? I think we do it by articulating a vision for the maintenance of a military and non-military capability, including such things as now are euphemistically called soft power, but I have in mind rather more aggressively using soft power than those who generally talk about it that way, specifically intelligence capabilities, financial warfare capabilities, political warfare capabilities, and unconventional forms of warfare as well. These are capabilities we have enjoyed in the past, we have used to decisive effect, particularly during the Reagan strategy for destroying the Soviet Union. And yes, that's what it was, and that's what it took to bring down that last horrible totalitarian empire. We must also, and this is an issue on which some conservatives are very much in disagreement, I believe, preserve the tools that are needed to defend this country from the enemies within as well as abroad, including, I would suggest to you, the Patriot Act. We must secure our borders, especially at a moment when Mexico is descending into chaos. We are going to find ourselves, I'm afraid, with a great many more people here illegally, seeking, as they will, inevitably, to stay here, and almost certainly finding, in certain quarters in Washington at least, a desire to legitimate them as permanent residents and as voters, which will, of course, make it even more unlikely that the sorts of policies and principles and electoral arrangements that I've described apply. Finally, we need to counter Sharia. I am not speaking of the practice of many, many Muslims, including many in this country, a considerable number of whom came here to get away from Sharia, who practice their faith in a peaceful, tolerant way that is very much consistent with the practice of freedom of religion and indeed our Constitution. I'm talking about people who believe that it is their duty as Muslims to destroy our constitutional government, to bring about their own form of government, indeed a global theocracy, whose purpose is to rule the world pursuant to Sharia and under a caliph or ayatollah, depending on which flavor you get. The point is, this is a mortal threat to America, to everything we hold dear, and I, for one, will not tolerate it being imposed upon us without fighting to the last ounce of my strength. Let me just conclude in putting a fine point on this. I suggest to you that everyone in this room, if you agree with me, or even if you don't agree with me, but you're nonetheless concerned about the sorts of trends that are underway, that you must look with great concern at the appointment of Chaz Freeman to be the National Intelligence Council Chairman by Barack Obama. This is a man who has worked for the Saudis, not just as our ambassador in Saudi Arabia, but subsequently, who has been part of the Iran lobby in this country, who has taken the most hostile view of any public figure I can think of at the moment against Israel, and who is also closely aligned with communist China. It is unimaginable to me that such a man would be the man determining what our national intelligence estimates say. So there's a full plate of things for us to be thinking about. I appreciate your attention to this, and I hope you will take it to heart. Thank you.